Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Accident. The fluorescent lights in Riverside General Hospital cast a sickly pallor over everything they touched. Robert Bobby Hutchinson stood outside room 314, his calloused hands gripping a cup of cold coffee that had long since lost any appeal. Through the small window, he could see his 17-year-old son Tommy lying motionless, tubes and wires creating a mechanical spider web around his still form. Bobby had built his construction empire from nothing, starting with a single hammer and a willingness to work 18-hour days. At 45, his weathered face told the story of every foundation he'd poured, every beam he'd raised, every rival he'd crushed to reach the top. Hutchinson Construction dominated the tri-state area, and Bobby's reputation for getting things done, by any means necessary, preceded him into every boardroom and job site. But none of that mattered now. Not with Tommy fighting for his life. Dr. Patricia Reeves emerged from the room, her expression carefully neutral. Bobby had dealt with enough people in crisis to read the signs. The slight downturn of her mouth, the way she avoided direct eye contact, the hesitation before speaking. "Mr. Hutchinson, I need to be direct with you," she began, pulling off her latex gloves. "The brain trauma from the motorcycle accident is severe. There's significant swelling, and despite our best efforts—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "There's little chance he'll wake up. I'm sorry." The words hit Bobby like a sledgehammer to the chest, but his expression didn't change. Years of high-stakes negotiations had taught him to never show weakness, never let the other side see you bleed. "What about Linda?" Dr. Reeves asked, glancing around. "Where's your wife?" Bobby's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She had somewhere else to be. The truth was more pathetic than he cared to admit. When the hospital had called 3 hours ago, Linda had been getting ready for one of her charity galas, some fundraiser for the Arts Council that she claimed was too important to miss. Even when Bobby told her about Tommy's accident, she'd insisted she had to make an appearance first. "I'll just show my face for an hour," she'd said, applying lipstick in their bedroom mirror. "You can handle things at the hospital until I get there." Handle things. As if their son's potential death was just another construction project to manage. Bobby entered Tommy's room alone, the steady beep of monitors providing a mechanical heartbeat. He pulled a chair close to the bed and studied his son's face, so much like his own at that age, before life had hardened Bobby's features into something more intimidating than handsome. Tommy had always been different from Bobby. Where Bobby was calculating and ruthless, Tommy was idealistic and gentle. The boy read books instead of blueprints, preferred photography to power tools, and actually seemed to believe that people were fundamentally good. Bobby had worried that such naivety would get Tommy eaten alive in the real world. He'd never imagined it might literally get him killed. The motorcycle had been a compromise. Tommy's 18th birthday was next month, and he'd been begging for one for years. Linda had been against it, claiming it was too dangerous, but Bobby had seen it as a chance to teach the boy some practical skills. Now Tommy lay broken because Bobby had given in to his son's request. Reaching out, Bobby gently took Tommy's hand, careful not to disturb the 4 lines. The boy's skin was cold, and Bobby found himself rubbing Tommy's fingers, trying to warm them. That's when he felt it, something small and hard pressing against his palm from Tommy's jacket pocket. Bobby frowned and carefully reached in, pulling out a small brass key attached to a simple metal ring. Dangling from the ring was a folded piece of paper, about the size of a business card. Bobby unfolded the note with growing confusion. The handwriting was shaky, hurried, definitely Tommy's, but written in obvious distress. "Mom, use this to unlock what's inside. You need to know the truth about Derek before it's too late. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you myself. T. Derek." Bobby knew that name, though he'd only met the man twice. Derek Manning was Linda's new business partner in her interior design firm. A smooth-talking 38-year-old who'd moved to town 6 months ago and somehow convinced Linda to bring him on as co-owner of her struggling company. Bobby had never liked Derek. There was something too polished about him, too rehearsed. He spoke like a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of telling people what they wanted to hear. When Bobby had suggested running a background check, standard practice for anyone involved in Linda's business, she'd laughed it off. He's not building skyscrapers, Bobby. He's helping me pick out curtains and paint colors. But this note suggested Tommy had discovered something about Derek that Linda didn't know. Something serious enough that a 17-year-old boy felt compelled to investigate and document it. Something that might have led to his accident. Bobby studied the key more closely. It was small, the kind used for filing cabinets, safety deposit boxes, or lockers. No identifying marks or numbers. Tommy could have hidden whatever this unlocked anywhere. The door opened, and Bobby quickly pocketed the key and note. But instead of Linda, a police officer entered. Detective Ray Morrison, a gruff man in his 50s whom Bobby recognized from various city council meetings. Mr. Hutchinson, Morrison nodded grimly. I wanted to follow up on the accident report. What's the follow-up? Tommy lost control of his bike and hit a tree. Morrison consulted his notepad. That's what it looked like initially, but the crash investigation team found something interesting. The bike's brake lines had been cut, not completely severed, but scored deep enough that they'd fail under pressure. The room seemed to tilt slightly. You're saying someone sabotaged his motorcycle? That's what the evidence suggests. We're treating this as attempted murder now. Morrison's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, Bobby. I know this makes everything worse. Bobby's mind raced. Tommy had discovered something about Derek, something significant enough to hide evidence and leave cryptic notes. And now someone had tried to kill Tommy, possibly to keep him quiet. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and Bobby didn't like what he was seeing. Any idea who might have wanted to hurt Tommy? Morrison asked. No, Bobby lied smoothly. Everyone loved Tommy. He didn't have enemies. But Bobby was already thinking about Derek Manning, about the way the man always seemed to know just a little too much about Linda's schedule, about how he'd been pushing Linda to take on bigger projects that required her to travel more often, about how Linda had been different lately, more secretive, more defensive, more distant. Morrison left his card and promised to keep Bobby updated. Alone again with his unconscious son, Bobby pulled out the key and note, studying them by the harsh hospital lighting. Tommy had been trying to protect Linda from something. The boy had discovered Derek's true nature and had been gathering evidence. But before he could reveal the truth, someone had tried to silence him permanently. Bobby felt a familiar coldness settling into his chest, the same feeling he got when a competitor tried to undercut one of his bids or when a supplier attempted to cheat him. It was the feeling that preceded calculated, methodical destruction. Whoever had hurt Tommy had made the biggest mistake of their lives. Bobby Hutchinson had built his empire by never backing down from a fight and never forgetting those who crossed him. He'd started with nothing and crushed everyone who'd stood in his way. Now someone had touched his family, had tried to kill his son. They were going to learn why Bobby's competitors feared him, why his enemies didn't stay enemies for long, and why crossing a Hutchinson was the last mistake anyone ever made. Bobby squeezed Tommy's hand gently, then stood up. He had a key to follow and truth to uncover. And once he knew exactly who was responsible for this, he was going to make them pay in ways they'd never imagined possible. The games were over. The war had begun. Chapter 2, The Box. Bobby left the hospital at dawn, after spending the night watching Tommy's monitors and turning the mysterious key over in his hands. Linda had never shown up, texting around midnight that the charity event had run late and she'd see him in the morning. Bobby had responded with a simple okay that carried none of the volcanic rage building inside him. The Hutchinson estate sat on 40 acres outside town, a sprawling ranch house that Bobby had built with his own hands 15 years ago. As he pulled through the iron gates, he noticed Derek's black BMW wasn't in the driveway. Good. He needed time to search without interruption. Linda was in the kitchen wearing a silk robe, her perfectly styled blonde hair betraying no sign she'd been sleeping. At 41, she maintained the kind of polished beauty that required significant investment. Regular spa treatments, personal trainers, and the best cosmetic dermatologist money could buy. Bobby had been happy to pay for it all back when he believed she was worth it. How's Tommy? She asked. not looking up from her coffee cup. Alive. No change. Bobby studied her face for any hint of genuine concern. He saw none. Nice gala last night. Lovely. We raised over $200,000 for the Arts Center. She finally met his eyes. I'm sorry I couldn't get away earlier. You know how these things are. Once you're there, it's impossible to leave gracefully. Bobby nodded, filing away another lie. He'd called the Arts Center at midnight. The gala had ended at 10:30. Where's Derek this morning? How would I know? Linda's response came too quickly, too defensively. He's probably at his apartment. Another lie. Derek had bought a house on Elm Street 3 months ago. Bobby had seen the deed records when he'd started doing some quiet research on his wife's business partner. Linda knew exactly where Derek lived. I need to shower and get back to the hospital, Bobby said. The police want to ask me some more questions. He watched Linda's face carefully. There, just a flicker of something. Fear? Guilt? Police? Why would they need to ask you questions? Tommy's brake lines were cut. They're treating it as attempted murder now. Linda's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. That's impossible. Who would want to hurt Tommy? Good question. Bobby headed toward the stairs. I'm sure they'll figure it out. In their bedroom, Bobby went through the motions of gathering clothes while mentally cataloging every place Tommy might have hidden whatever the key unlocked. The boy was methodical, like his father, but also sentimental. He wouldn't put important evidence somewhere completely random. It would be somewhere meaningful, somewhere safe. Bobby's eyes fell on the family portrait hanging above their dresser. Taken 2 years ago, it showed the 3 of them at their lake house, all smiling at the camera. But Bobby remembered that day differently now. Linda had been checking her phone constantly, claiming she was waiting for an important client call. Derek had been texting her frequently around that time, supposedly about business. The lake house. Tommy loved that place, had spent countless summers there fishing and reading. If he'd wanted to hide something important, somewhere his mother might think to look but Derek wouldn't know about, the lake house would be perfect. Bobby dressed quickly and headed downstairs. Linda was on the phone in her study, speaking in hushed tones. He caught fragments as he passed. Told you this was a mistake. And need to be more careful now. She ended the call when she saw him. That was Derek. He wanted to know how Tommy was doing. Thoughtful of him. Bobby left without saying goodbye, his mind already racing ahead. The lake house was an hour drive, enough time to think through everything he knew and plan his next moves. 20 years ago, Bobby had been a different man. Young, trusting, madly in love with the beautiful receptionist at the architectural firm where he'd worked as a junior contractor. Linda had been sweet then, or at least good at pretending to be. She'd supported his dream of starting his own company, had even suggested the name Hutchinson Construction. But success had changed her. As Bobby's company grew and the money rolled in, Linda had developed expensive tastes and a social circle that looked down on Bobby's blue-collar roots. She'd started taking trips to New York for design inspiration, joining country clubs where Bobby felt like a fraud in his expensive suits, and surrounding herself with people who saw him as nothing more than a wallet with legs. Derek Manning represented everything Bobby wasn't: cultured, refined, educated at the right schools. He spoke fluent French, had studied art history in Paris, and could discuss wine and literature with the kind of casual expertise that made Bobby feel like the high school dropout he was. Bobby had built an empire, but Derek had been born into one. Old money, old family, old connections. The kind of man Linda had probably wished she'd married instead of the rough construction worker who'd gotten lucky. The lake house came into view as Bobby rounded the final curve. It was smaller than their main home, but more honest somehow. Cedar logs and native stone, built to complement the landscape rather than dominate it. Tommy had helped Bobby build the dock when he was 12, more hindrance than help, but eager to learn. Bobby parked and walked the property, thinking like Tommy would think. Where would a 17-year-old hide something important? Somewhere his parents might look, but a stranger wouldn't think to search. The old tool shed behind the house caught his eye. Bobby had built it for storing lake equipment, but Tommy had claimed half of it years ago for his photography supplies. Bobby tried the door. Locked, but with a simple padlock that looked newer than the shed itself. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside, Bobby found Tommy's photography equipment neatly arranged on makeshift shelves. But in the back corner sat a small fireproof safe, the kind used for important documents. It had an electronic lock, and scotch taped to the top was a piece of paper with a 6-digit code written in Tommy's handwriting. Bobby's hands shook slightly as he entered the numbers. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were dozens of photographs, printed on photo paper with professional clarity. Bobby's blood turned to ice as he recognized the subjects. Linda and Derek, captured in intimate moments that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. The photos were dated, some going back nearly 8 months. Derek kissing Linda in his car. Linda leaving Derek's house early in the morning. The two of them in passionate embraces in locations Bobby recognized. Hotel lobbies, restaurant parking lots, even the back office of Linda's design firm. But the photos weren't just evidence of an affair. They told a more sinister story. Several showed Derek meeting with unfamiliar men in dark clothing. Meetings that took place in parking garages and abandoned buildings. In one series, Derek was handing over what looked like blueprints or documents. In another, he was receiving a thick envelope from a man with gang tattoos visible on his neck. At the bottom of the stack was a manila folder labeled Derek Manning Research in Tommy's careful handwriting. Inside, Bobby found printouts of news articles from Derek's previous cities: Portland, Seattle, Phoenix. A pattern emerged. Derek would arrive in a city, charm his way into partnerships with successful local businesses, and those businesses would suffer mysterious setbacks. Fires, thefts, accidents that destroyed inventory or damaged reputations. The final document made Bobby's blood run cold. It was a copy of a life insurance policy, one Bobby didn't recognize. Linda had taken out a $2 million policy on Tommy's life 6 months ago, with herself as the sole beneficiary. A handwritten note from Tommy was clipped to the policy. Found this in Mom's desk. She never told Dad. Why would she need this much insurance on me? Bobby sank into an old lawn chair, the full scope of the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. This wasn't just an affair. Linda and Derek had been planning something bigger, something that involved Tommy's death and a massive insurance payout. Tommy had discovered their plan and been gathering evidence to expose them. But before he could reveal the truth, they tried to eliminate him permanently. The brake lines hadn't been cut by some random criminal. They'd been sabotaged by Derek on Linda's orders to silence their son and claim the insurance money. Bobby's phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Where are you?" "Derek's coming over to discuss some business." "Thought you'd want to know." Derek was coming to the house, probably to search for any evidence Tommy might have hidden, to tie up loose ends before the police investigation got too close. Bobby carefully repacked everything in the safe, locked it, and pocketed the key. Then he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number he needed. "Marcus? It's Bobby Hutchinson. I need you and the boys to meet me at my house in an hour. Full crew." "And Marcus?" "Bring the special tools." Marcus Rodriguez had worked for Bobby for 15 years, starting as a day laborer and working his way up to foreman. But more importantly, Marcus and his crew handled Bobby's special projects, the jobs that required discretion and absolute loyalty. Competitors who tried to sabotage Bobby's projects. Suppliers who attempted to double-cross him. City inspectors who demanded unreasonable bribes. Marcus never asked questions, never left loose ends, and never disappointed Bobby. His crew was made up of men who understood that some problems couldn't be solved through legal channels. As Bobby drove back toward town, his mind was already working through the logistics. Derek and Linda thought they were dealing with a grieving father who would be too distracted by his son's condition to notice their deception. They were about to learn that they'd gravely underestimated Bobby Hutchinson. He'd built his empire by being smarter, tougher, and more ruthless than everyone else. He'd crushed competitors who tried to destroy him, eliminated threats before they could fully develop, and never once shown mercy to those who betrayed his trust. Derek and Linda had tried to murder his son for money. They betrayed everything Bobby held sacred, violated the one rule that could never be broken: you don't touch family. Now, they were going to pay for that mistake with everything they had, everything they were, and everything they ever hoped to be. Bobby Hutchinson was done being the grieving father. It was time to remind everyone why his enemies didn't stay enemies for long. Chapter 3. The Truth Unveiled. Bobby arrived at his estate 30 minutes before Derek was scheduled to appear. Marcus and his crew were already waiting. 5 men who'd been with Bobby through every ugly situation his business had required. They sat in Marcus's van, engines running, faces hidden behind the tinted windows. Marcus stepped out as Bobby parked. At 52, he was built like a fire hydrant, short, thick, and impossible to move when he didn't want to be moved. His hands were scarred from 20 years of construction work, but Bobby knew they were equally skilled at more delicate tasks. "What's the situation, boss?" Marcus's voice carried the flat tone of a man who'd seen everything and been surprised by nothing. "My wife and her boyfriend tried to murder my son. They're coming here to clean up evidence." Bobby handed Marcus a copy of Tommy's photos. "I need them alive for questioning." After that, he shrugged. Disposal. Marcus glanced through the photos without expression. "How long do we have?" "Derek should be here in 20 minutes. Linda's inside." "Weapons." "Derek might be armed. He's been meeting with some rough characters. Linda's probably just scared." Bobby checked his watch. "I want to talk to them first. Get the full confession on record. Then you boys can take over." The crew dispersed around the property with military precision. Bobby had learned years ago that when you needed serious problems solved, you hired serious men. Marcus's team included 2 ex-military specialists, a former police detective who'd been forced into early retirement, and a demolitions expert who officially worked removing old buildings but unofficially made problems disappear completely. Bobby entered his house through the back door. Linda was in her study, frantically going through file cabinets and desk drawers. She looked up as he entered, guilt written across her face. "You're back early," she said, trying to sound casual while shoving papers into her purse. "Looking for something specific." "Just some insurance documents." "For Tommy." The lie came easily, but her hands were shaking. Bobby leaned against the doorframe, studying the woman he'd loved for 20 years. She was still beautiful, still poised, but now he could see the calculation behind her every expression. How long had she been planning this? How many times had she looked at Tommy and seen dollar signs instead of their son? "Find what you needed?" "Not yet. The filing system in here is chaos." Linda forced a smile. "Maybe you could help me look? I'm sure Derek will be more helpful." "When's he getting here?" Linda's face went pale. "Derek? I don't think—" The front doorbell rang, cutting off her lie. Bobby smiled coldly. Right on time. He walked to the front door, aware that Linda was following at a distance. Through the peephole, he could see Derek standing on the porch, looking casual in expensive slacks and a polo shirt. The man checked his watch, then glanced around nervously. Bobby opened the door with a welcoming smile. "Derek, what a pleasant surprise." "Bobby." Derek's handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "I heard about Tommy. Terrible thing. Linda asked me to stop by and see if there's anything I can do to help." "That's very thoughtful. Come in." Bobby led Derek into the living room, where Linda was now sitting on the couch, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. The 3 of them formed an awkward triangle, and Bobby could feel the tension radiating from his wife and her lover. "Can I get you something to drink?" Bobby asked pleasantly. "I'm fine, thanks." Derek sat down across from Linda, careful to maintain appropriate distance. "How is Tommy doing? Any improvement?" "The doctors say there's little chance he'll wake up." Bobby watched Derek's face carefully. There, just a flicker of satisfaction before the man rearranged his features into appropriate concern. "But you probably already knew that." Derek frowned. "I'm sorry. I don't understand." Bobby pulled out his phone and scrolled to the photo of Derek meeting with the tattooed man. He held it up for both of them to see. "I found Tommy's little photography project. Kid had quite an eye for capturing interesting moments." Linda gasped, her face draining of color. Derek went very still, his practiced charm evaporating. "I don't know what you think that photo shows," Derek began. "I think it shows you meeting with criminals to arrange my son's murder." Bobby's voice remained conversational. "Along with about 50 other photos of you and my wife planning to cash in on Tommy's life insurance policy." Linda started to cry, real tears, but Bobby suspected they were for herself rather than Tommy. Derek, however, remained calm. Too calm. You're upset, Derek said carefully. Grief can make people see things that aren't there, connect dots that don't actually. 3 months ago, you convinced Linda to increase Tommy's life insurance to $2 million. 2 months ago, you started meeting with people who specialize in making accidents happen. Last week, you cut my son's brake lines. Bobby stood up slowly. The only thing I don't understand is whether Linda came up with the plan or if you talked her into it. Derek's composure finally cracked. His hand moved toward his jacket pocket, but Bobby was ready for it. I wouldn't, Bobby said quietly. You're surrounded. As if on cue, Marcus appeared in the doorway behind Derek, while 2 other crew members entered through the kitchen. Derek's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Bobby, please, Linda sobbed. You don't understand. Derek said we could be together, that we could start over somewhere new, but we needed money. Real money. And Tommy was going to college soon anyway, and the insurance was just sitting there. Just sitting there, Bobby repeated. Our son's life was just an inconvenient obstacle to your retirement plans. Derek slowly raised his hands. Look, Hutchinson, let's discuss this rationally. You're a businessman. You understand that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good. Bobby stared at him in amazement. Even caught red-handed, Derek was trying to negotiate. The greater good? You tried to murder my son for money. Your son discovered something he shouldn't have, Derek said coldly, his mask finally slipping completely. He was going to ruin everything. We had no choice. There's always a choice. Bobby nodded to Marcus, who stepped forward and efficiently removed a pistol from Derek's jacket. You chose to be a predator. Linda chose money over family. Tommy chose to be a hero and try to save his mother from a monster. Bobby pulled out the insurance policy Tommy had found. $2 million. Is that really what you thought my son's life was worth? It was enough for us to disappear, Linda whispered. To start over somewhere Derek's past wouldn't follow him. Derek's past? Bobby looked at the man with renewed interest. You mean the 3 other cities where businesses mysteriously burned down after you became a partner? The insurance fraud investigations that always seemed to go cold right before charges were filed. Derek's eyes widened. Tommy's research had been even more thorough than Bobby had realized. The kid figured out your whole operation, Bobby continued. You target successful women with failing businesses. Promise them partnership and romance. Then arrange accidents that trigger insurance payouts before disappearing to the next city. Except this time, you decided my son was worth more dead than Linda's business was worth saving. The boy was getting too close, Derek snarled. Another few days, and he would have gone to the police. We had to act. Bobby felt the last of his restraint evaporate. For months, he'd watched Derek charm his wife, had tolerated the man's presence in his home, had even tried to like him for Linda's sake. All while Derek had been planning to murder Tommy for insurance money. Marcus, Bobby said quietly, take them to the warehouse. Keep them comfortable but secure. I need to make some arrangements. Bobby, you can't do this. Linda struggled as Marcus's men lifted her from the couch. I'm your wife. We can work this out. You stopped being my wife the moment you chose him over our son. Bobby's voice was cold as winter steel. You became a stranger who tried to murder my child for money. Derek didn't beg or plead. He just stared at Bobby with pure hatred. You think you've won something? You have no idea who you're dealing with. My associates won't let this slide. Your associates? Bobby laughed harshly. You mean the bottom feeders who cut brake lines for cash? They're going to be too busy running for their lives to worry about you. As Marcus's crew led Derek and Linda away, Bobby pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Morrison's direct number. Morrison? Bobby Hutchinson. I found out who tried to kill my son, but there's been a complication. The suspects have disappeared. I think they might be running. Yes, I'll come in first thing tomorrow to give you everything I have. After hanging up, Bobby stood alone in his living room, surrounded by the wreckage of 20 years of marriage. Photos of family vacations smiled down at him from every surface. Images of a life that had been built on lies, of a wife who'd been calculating his son's worth in dollars while posing for happy family pictures. Tomorrow, he would give the police enough evidence to trigger a massive manhunt for Derek and Linda. He would play the role of the devastated husband who discovered his wife's betrayal too late to save her from her own poor choices. But tonight, Derek and Linda would learn exactly what happened to people who tried to destroy Bobby Hutchinson's family. Bobby walked to his liquor cabinet and poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon, the good stuff he'd been saving for Tommy's 18th birthday. He raised the glass toward the family portrait above the mantel. "Don't worry, son," he said quietly. "Daddy's going to make this right." Outside, Marcus's van disappeared into the darkness, carrying 2 people toward a reckoning 20 years in the making. Bobby Hutchinson had built his empire by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. Now Derek and Linda were going to learn why his enemies didn't stay enemies for long. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. Bobby spent the night at the hospital, holding Tommy's hand and planning. By dawn, he had made 17 phone calls to contacts across 3 states, each conversation brief and coded. Old favors were being called in, debts were being collected, and a network of loyal associates was mobilizing. Dr. Reeves found him in the family lounge, staring out at the parking lot where Tommy's motorcycle had been loaded onto a police trailer the day before. "Mr. Hutchinson, I wanted to update you on Tommy's condition." Bobby turned, hope and dread warring in his chest. "Any change?" "Actually, yes. The swelling in his brain has decreased slightly. It's still too early to be optimistic, but his responses to stimuli are improving." Dr. Reeves managed a cautious smile. "He's young and strong. Don't give up hope yet." For the first time in 36 hours, Bobby felt something other than rage. Tommy was fighting. His son was a survivor, just like his old man. "Can I see him?" "Of course." "And Mr. Hutchinson, I noticed your wife hasn't been by yet. Is everything all right at home?" Bobby's expression darkened. Linda had some business to take care of out of town. Emergency trip. In Tommy's room, Bobby studied his son's face for any sign of the improvement Dr. Reeves had mentioned. Tommy looked the same, pale, still attached to machines, but somehow Bobby could sense a difference. A strength that hadn't been there before. "Your mom won't be coming by anymore," Bobby said quietly, adjusting Tommy's blankets. "She made some choices that can't be undone. But don't worry about that now. You just focus on getting better." Bobby's phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Packages secured. Awaiting instructions." The warehouse Marcus referenced was officially owned by a shell company that existed only on paper. Located in an industrial district 20 miles from town, it had been designed for storing equipment, but had been modified over the years for more specialized purposes. Soundproof walls, multiple exit routes, and no security cameras for miles in any direction. Bobby had used it twice before, once for a city inspector who demanded a $50,000 bribe, and once for a rival contractor who'd been sabotaging Bobby's projects. Both situations had been resolved permanently and quietly. But this was different. This was personal. Bobby squeezed Tommy's hand one more time and headed for the door. He had work to do. The warehouse sat at the end of a gravel road that wound through abandoned industrial buildings. Bobby's truck kicked up dust clouds as he approached, the morning sun casting long shadows across the empty landscape. Marcus's van was parked beside the loading dock, along with 2 other vehicles Bobby recognized. Inside, the warehouse had been divided into sections. The main floor housed legitimate construction equipment, but the back section had been converted into something more specialized. Soundproof rooms, reinforced doors, and facilities for extended stays. Marcus met Bobby at the entrance to the special section. "They're in room 3. Been asking for lawyers, making threats, the usual. Any problems bringing them in?" Manning had a backup piece strapped to his ankle. Took it off him. Linda fought like a wildcat, but she's secured now. Marcus handed Bobby a small digital recorder. "Thought you might want this for whatever comes next." Bobby pocketed the device and walked toward room 3. Through a small window, he could see Derek and Linda sitting in metal chairs, their hands zip-tied behind their backs. Linda was still crying. Derek was staring at the wall with cold fury. Bobby entered the room, followed by Marcus. Derek looked up with undisguised hatred. "This is kidnapping, Hutchinson. False imprisonment. You're looking at 20 years minimum." "Am I?" Bobby pulled up a third chair and sat down facing them. "Because according to Detective Morrison, You and Linda fled town after learning about the brake line investigation. Guilty parties running from justice. Very suspicious behavior. Linda looked up sharply. You told the police we ran? I told them the truth. That when I confronted you about the insurance policy and Derek's criminal background, you both disappeared. Bobby turned on the digital recorder and placed it on a nearby table. Now I need you to tell me the rest of the truth. Starting with when you first decided my son was worth more dead than alive. Derek leaned back in his chair. You want a confession? Here's your confession. Your son was a naive boy who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. Your wife was a lonely woman married to a man who cared more about concrete and steel than human relationships. I simply provided what you couldn't. And what was that? Attention, affection, a future that didn't involve being married to a glorified construction worker for the rest of her life. Bobby felt Marcus tense behind him, but he kept his own voice level. So you convinced her to kill Tommy. I convinced her that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. Derek's smile was cold. Linda understood that Tommy's inheritance would be tied up in trusts and legal complications for years. But insurance money? That's clean, immediate, and completely untraceable once it's been properly laundered. Linda was sobbing harder now. Derek said it would look like an accident, that Tommy wouldn't suffer, that we could use the money to start over somewhere beautiful, somewhere we could be happy. And you believed him? I loved him. Linda screamed. Do you understand that? I actually loved someone who loved me back. You never loved me, Bobby. You loved having me. You loved showing me off like another one of your possessions. But Derek saw me as a person. Bobby studied his wife's face, searching for any trace of the woman he'd married 20 years ago. When did you stop loving Tommy? The question seemed to hit Linda like a physical blow. I never stopped loving him. But Derek explained that Tommy would never really be happy anyway. He was too sensitive for this world, too gentle. Derek said it would be kinder to murder him for money, to let him go peacefully before life could break him the way it breaks everyone else. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. Derek said Tommy would thank us if he could understand. Bobby turned to Derek. And what about the other families in Portland, Seattle, Phoenix? Did they thank you too? Derek's composure finally cracked completely. Those situations were business. Cold, clean business arrangements between consenting adults. This is different. Different how? Because I actually care about Linda. The others were just marks, just means to an end. But Linda and I have something real. Derek leaned forward as much as his restraints allowed. You want to know the truth, Hutchinson? Your wife came to me. She approached me, seduced me, convinced me to help her. I was just going to take the business money and move on, but she made me a better offer. Bobby looked at Linda, who was shaking her head frantically. That's not true. Derek, tell him that's not true. She'd been researching ways to kill Tommy for months before I ever suggested the insurance angle. Derek continued. She'd looked into accidental drowning, food poisoning, even hiring professionals. I just provided a cleaner method. Derek, stop. Linda was hyperventilating now. Please stop talking. But Derek was in full confessional mode, perhaps hoping to shift blame or buy himself mercy. She showed me Tommy's room, pointed out all the ways she could make it look like suicide. Said the insurance money would be cleaner than dealing with inheritance lawyers. Said Tommy was getting suspicious anyway, that he'd been asking questions about her business trips. Bobby felt something fundamental shift inside him. Linda hadn't been seduced by Derek. She'd been planning Tommy's murder independently and recruited Derek to help execute it. How long? Bobby asked quietly. How long what? How long had you been planning to kill our son? Linda looked up at him with tear-streaked mascara, and for just a moment, Bobby saw something that chilled him to the bone. Relief. Relief that she didn't have to pretend anymore. Since his 16th birthday, she whispered. When I realized the insurance policies I'd been building would mature when he turned 18. When I understood that he was going to college and wouldn't need me anymore, wouldn't be my baby anymore. When I calculated that $2 million could buy me freedom from this life, from this marriage, from being Bobby Hutchinson's trophy wife. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the warehouse's ventilation system. Bobby stared at the woman who'd shared his bed for 20 years, who'd held their newborn son, who'd posed for thousands of family photos with love and tenderness that had apparently been completely fake. "You've been planning to murder Tommy for almost 2 years. I've been planning to set him free," Linda corrected, "and to set myself free in the process." Bobby stood up slowly, his legs feeling unsteady. Behind him, Marcus cleared his throat. "Boss, what are your instructions?" Bobby looked down at Derek and Linda, two people who'd spent months planning to murder his son, who'd sabotaged Tommy's motorcycle and left him to die on a lonely country road, who'd been prepared to cash insurance checks while Bobby grieved over their child's grave. "Give me some time to think," Bobby said finally. "Keep them comfortable. Keep them fed. But don't let them communicate with anyone." "Understood." As Bobby walked toward the door, Derek called after him. "Hutchinson, you can't keep us here forever. Eventually, someone's going to come looking." Bobby paused at the threshold. "Who's going to look for you, Derek? Your criminal associates who you were planning to double-cross? The police you've been running from for years? Or maybe Linda's friends from the country club will organize a search party?" He turned back to face them both. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to take some time to decide exactly how to handle this situation. In the meantime, you're going to stay here and think about what you've done. Think about Tommy lying in that hospital bed. Think about the fact that your greed and selfishness almost killed an innocent boy." "And then what?" Linda asked. Bobby's smile was colder than anything Derek had ever managed. "Then you're going to pay for what you've done. Both of you. In ways that will make you wish you'd never been born." He walked out, leaving them alone with Marcus and the weight of their confession. Outside, Bobby breathed deeply, trying to clear his head. Tommy was improving. His son was going to survive, was going to have a chance at the life Derek and Linda had tried to steal from him. But justice was still pending. And Bobby Hutchinson had never been patient when it came to collecting debts. Chapter 5. The Trap Closes. 3 days later, Tommy opened his eyes. Bobby was dozing in the bedside chair when he heard the change in his son's breathing. Tommy's eyes were unfocused at first, struggling against the harsh hospital lighting, but they found Bobby's face and held. "Dad!" Tommy's voice was barely a whisper, his throat raw from the breathing tube that had been removed that morning. "I'm here, son." Bobby gripped Tommy's hand, feeling tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed for 72 hours. "I'm right here. My bike. There was something wrong with the brakes." "I know. We'll talk about that later. Right now, you just need to rest and get better." Tommy's eyes darted around the room. "Where's Mom?" Bobby had dreaded this question. "She's not here, Tommy. She won't be coming. Is she sick? Did something happen to her?" "Something happened, but not what you think." Bobby squeezed his son's hand gently. "Tommy, I found your hiding place at the lake house. I found all the photos, all the research." Tommy's eyes widened, and Bobby could see the memories flooding back. "Derek, he saw me taking pictures. He chased me, but I got away. I went home to warn Mom, but she wasn't there. I was going to wait for you, but I got scared and decided to ride to the police station instead. That's when the brakes failed. They were fine when I left the house. Perfect. I checked them myself that morning because the bike had been making weird noises." Tommy struggled to sit up. "Dad, Derek did something to them. He tried to kill me." "I know. And your mother knew too." The color drained from Tommy's face. "What do you mean?" Bobby had hoped to ease into this conversation, but Tommy deserved the truth. "Your mother and Derek planned it together, son. They took out life insurance on you and arranged the accident to collect the money." Tommy stared at his father in disbelief. "That's impossible. Mom loves me. She would never." "I have their confessions, Tommy. Recorded confessions where they admitted everything." Bobby's voice was gentle but firm. "Your mother has been planning this for almost 2 years." Tommy turned his face toward the wall, tears streaming down his cheeks. Bobby felt his heart break watching his son process the ultimate betrayal. How do you explain to a 17-year-old that his mother wanted him dead for money? "Where are they now?" Tommy asked finally. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't hurt anyone else." Tommy looked back at his father, and Bobby saw something new in his son's eyes. Something harder than had been there before the accident. "What are you going to do to them?" Bobby studied his son's face carefully. Tommy had always been idealistic, believing in justice and forgiveness. But having your own mother try to murder you for insurance money had a way of changing a person's perspective on such things. What do you think I should do? I think, Tommy said slowly, that they tried to kill me for money. I think Mom stopped being my mother the moment she decided I was worth more dead than alive. And I think Derek is a predator who's probably done this before. He has, at least 3 other times in 3 other cities. Tommy nodded grimly. Then I think you should make sure they never get the chance to hurt anyone else ever again. Bobby felt a surge of dark pride. His son was going to be all right. Changed, hardened, but all right. The police are looking for them, Bobby said carefully. They think Derek and your mother fled town when they learned about the brake line investigation. But they didn't flee. No, they didn't. Tommy was quiet for a long time, staring at the ceiling. Dad, when I get out of here, I want to help. Whatever you're planning, I want to be part of it. Tommy, they tried to kill me. My own mother tried to murder me for money. Tommy's voice was getting stronger, filled with a resolve Bobby had never heard before. I deserve to be part of whatever happens next. Bobby squeezed his son's hand. All right, but first you get better. Then we'll talk about justice. Over the next week, as Tommy's condition improved rapidly, Bobby finalized his plans. The warehouse had become a temporary prison, with Derek and Linda being held in separate rooms under Marcus's careful supervision. They were being fed, given medical attention, and kept comfortable, but they were also being slowly broken down through isolation and psychological pressure. Derek was cracking first, used to controlling situations through charm and manipulation. He was struggling with his complete powerlessness. He'd gone from demanding lawyers to offering information about his previous crimes in exchange for better treatment. Linda was holding up better, but Bobby knew her breaking point was coming. She'd always been dependent on others for her sense of identity. First on Bobby for financial security, then on Derek for emotional validation. Cut off from both sources, she was starting to unravel. But Bobby wasn't ready for them to break yet. He needed them functional for what came next. Boss, Marcus said as Bobby arrived at the warehouse on Friday morning. We've got a complication. What kind of complication? Linda's been asking about Tommy. Wants to know if he's alive, if he's going to recover. Derek's been telling her the kid's probably dead, that they succeeded even if they got caught. Bobby frowned, and she's starting to crack. Really crack. Last night she was screaming that she never wanted Tommy to die, that Derek forced her into it. This morning she's asking to write him a letter, begging to see him one more time. Buyer's remorse. Seems like it. Question is, do we want to let her think the kid's dead, or do we want her to know he survived? Bobby considered the options. Linda believing Tommy was dead would torment her with guilt. But Linda knowing Tommy was alive and improving would torment her with the knowledge that she'd failed to murder her own son and would face his judgment when this was over. Let her know he's alive. Let her know he's getting better every day. And let her know he's seen the evidence of what she tried to do. Marcus nodded. Copy that. What about Derek? Derek's a different problem. He's not going to break from guilt because he doesn't feel any. He's going to break from fear. Bobby smiled coldly. It's time to introduce him to some of his old associates. You found them. I found them. And they're very interested in having a conversation with Derek about some money that went missing in Phoenix. That afternoon, Bobby made a series of phone calls that would have impressed the FBI's organized crime unit. Within hours, 3 very unpleasant men were driving toward the warehouse in a black SUV with Arizona plates. Vincent, Vinny, Torino, and his associates had been looking for Derek Manning for 8 months. Derek had skipped town with $200,000 that belonged to some very serious people. Money that was supposed to fund Derek's next operation, but had instead been used to finance his move to Bobby's town. Vinny was the kind of man who collected debts with a crowbar and considered himself an artist in the field of creative interrogation. He and Derek had unfinished business that went well beyond money. As the sun set over the warehouse district, Bobby stood in the parking lot watching Vinny's SUV approach. Inside the warehouse, Derek Manning was about to learn that betraying Bobby Hutchinson was only the second worst mistake he'd made recently. The worst mistake had been thinking he could skip town without paying his debts to Vincent Torino. Bobby checked his watch. Tommy was being discharged from the hospital tomorrow morning. By then, Derek would understand exactly how serious his situation had become, and Linda would be ready for the conversation that would determine how the rest of her very short life would play out. Justice was coming, and Bobby Hutchinson was going to make sure it was thorough, complete, and absolutely final. Chapter 6, The Breaking Point. Bobby brought Tommy home from the hospital on a gray October morning that felt like the end of something. His son moved carefully, still healing from his injuries, but there was a new hardness in his eyes that made him look older than his 17 years. "How long have they been here?" Tommy asked as Bobby pulled through the estate gates. 6 days. "And they don't know I'm alive?" "They know now. I made sure Linda found out yesterday." Tommy nodded grimly. The boy who'd left for his motorcycle ride a week ago had believed in fairness, justice, and his mother's love. The young man sitting beside Bobby now understood that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven and some people didn't deserve second chances. They spent the afternoon going through Tommy's evidence together, with Bobby explaining how each piece fit into the larger picture. Tommy absorbed it all with clinical detachment, asking questions about Derek's previous crimes and Linda's financial motivations with the same tone he might use to discuss a school assignment. "When do I get to see them?" Tommy asked as they finished reviewing the insurance documents. "Tonight. But first, there's something you need to understand about what's been happening at the warehouse." Bobby explained about Vincent Torino and his associates, about Derek's mounting terror as his past caught up with him, about Linda's psychological deterioration as she faced the reality of what she'd done. "Derek's been telling Linda that you're dead," Bobby continued, "that even though they got caught, they succeeded in killing you. When she finds out you're alive and here, it's going to destroy whatever's left of her sanity." Tommy considered this. Good. She deserves to be destroyed. At 8 p.m., Bobby and Tommy drove to the warehouse. Marcus met them at the entrance, his expression grim. "Derek's in bad shape," Marcus reported. "Vinny's boys worked him over pretty good this afternoon. Nothing permanent, but he's scared out his mind. Linda's worse. She's been talking to herself, asking God to forgive her, begging for Tommy to haunt her dreams." "Let's start with Derek," Bobby decided. They found Derek Manning zip-tied to a metal chair in room 2, his face a patchwork of bruises and his expensive clothes torn. When he saw Bobby enter, followed by Tommy, Derek's eyes went wide with shock and terror. "No," Derek whispered. "You're supposed to be dead. The brakes failed. You crashed." Tommy limped closer, his face expressionless. "I survived. Sorry to disappoint you. This is impossible. The bike was totaled, the tree. You didn't cut the brake lines deep enough," Tommy said calmly. "They failed on a straight stretch instead of a curve. I managed to lay the bike down instead of hitting the tree head-on." Derek stared at Tommy as if seeing a ghost. "But Vinny said," Linda's been believing what you told her," Bobby interjected. "That you'd succeeded in murdering my son. Imagine how she's going to feel when she finds out you failed." Derek began hyperventilating. It was one thing to face Bobby's wrath or even Vinny Torino's violent debt collection, but having his victim alive, standing in front of him, making it impossible to maintain any psychological distance from his crime, that was breaking him. "I want you to understand something," Tommy said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "I spent 3 days in a coma because you and my mother decided I was worth more dead than alive. 3 days where the doctors weren't sure I'd ever wake up." Derek was shaking now. "Tommy, you have to understand, it wasn't personal. It was just business, just business." Tommy's voice finally carried some emotion, cold fury. "You tried to murder me for insurance money. You convinced my mother to betray her own son. You destroyed my family for $2 million. Your mother approached me. She's the one who wanted you dead." The slap came so fast Derek didn't see it coming. Tommy's hand connected with Derek's injured face, sending fresh blood spattering across the concrete floor. "Don't you ever talk about my mother that way," Tommy said quietly. "Yes, she betrayed me. Yes, she wanted me dead. But you're the predator who made it possible. You're the one who showed her how to turn murder into profit." Bobby watched his son with a mixture of pride and concern. Tommy was handling this better than expected, but there was something different about him now. Something that worried Bobby, even as it impressed him. "What do you want from me?" Derek asked through swollen lips. "I want you to understand what you've cost me," Tommy replied. "My mother's love. my trust in family, my belief that people are fundamentally good. You took all of that away when you decided to use me as a payday. Tommy turned to Bobby. I'm ready to see her now. Linda was in room 3, pacing frantically in the small space. When the door opened and she saw Tommy walking in behind Bobby, she collapsed her knees. Tommy, she screamed. Oh God, Tommy, you're alive. She tried to rush toward him, but her zip-tied hands threw off her balance, and she fell forward. Tommy made no move to help her up. Hello, Mother. Linda struggled to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Baby, are you okay? Are you hurt? They told me you were dead. They said the accident. The accident you planned, Tommy said quietly. The murder you arranged with Derek. Linda's face crumpled. No, baby, no. You don't understand. Derek said it would be quick, that you wouldn't suffer. He promised me you wouldn't feel any pain. I felt plenty of pain, Mother. Physical pain when the bike crashed. Emotional pain when I realized my own mother wanted me dead. And the pain I'm feeling right now, looking at you and remembering all the times you hugged me and told me you loved me while planning to murder me for money. I do love you, Linda sobbed. I've always loved you. But Derek explained that you'd never really be happy, that the world would break you eventually, that it would be kinder to murder me for $2 million. Linda stared at her son, seeing the change in him, the hardness that hadn't been there before. What have I done? She whispered. Oh God, what have I done to you? You tried to murder me, Tommy said simply. You spent 2 years planning to kill your own son for insurance money. You recruited a criminal to help you. You sabotaged my motorcycle and left me to die on a country road. I never wanted you to suffer, but you wanted me dead. Linda couldn't answer. The truth was too ugly to voice, too horrible to acknowledge. Tommy turned to Bobby. I'm done here. I've seen enough. As they walked toward the door, Linda called after them desperately. Tommy, please, give me a chance to explain. Give me a chance to make this right. Tommy paused at the threshold. There's nothing to explain, Mother, and there's no way to make this right. You chose money over your son's life. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice. What consequences? Linda asked, terror creeping into her voice. Tommy looked back at her with eyes that seemed far older than 17. You'll find out. Outside the room, Bobby put his hand on Tommy's shoulder. You did well in there. I don't feel good about it, Tommy admitted. I feel empty. Like something inside me died in that hospital room and isn't coming back. That's normal, son. Some betrayals change you permanently. Tommy nodded. What happens now? Bobby checked his watch. Now we let them think about what they've learned. Tomorrow, we start the final phase, which is... Bobby's smile was colder than anything Derek Manning had ever managed. Justice. Complete, final, and absolutely permanent. As they drove away from the warehouse, Tommy stared out at the darkness. Dad, when this is over, I want to leave town. Go to college somewhere far away. Start over where nobody knows what happened. We'll make that happen, Bobby promised. But first, we finish what Derek and your mother started. Tommy nodded. The boy who believed in fairness and second chances was gone forever. In his place sat a young man who understood that some people didn't deserve mercy, some crimes couldn't be forgiven, and some debts could only be paid in blood. Derek and Linda had created their own monster when they tried to murder Bobby Hutchinson's son. Now, they were going to meet him face to face. Chapter 7, Justice Served. The next evening, Bobby gathered everyone at the warehouse for what he privately called the final performance. Vinnie Torino and his associates were present, having been promised that Derek would soon be available for permanent debt collection. Marcus and his crew stood by, ready to handle whatever cleanup would be necessary. But the stars of this particular show were Derek and Linda, both of whom had been moved to the main floor and secured to chairs facing each other. For the first time since their capture, they could see each other's condition, Derek's battered face and Linda's hollow-eyed desperation. Tommy sat in a third chair, positioned between them like a judge. He'd insisted on being present for this, and Bobby had agreed. His son deserved to see justice done. Before we begin, Bobby announced, I want both of you to understand exactly where we are in this process. Derek, Vinnie Torino has legal claim to your life. You stole his money, skipped town, and left him holding the bag for a deal that went bad. Normally, I just hand you over and walk away. Derek's eyes darted toward Vinny, who smiled back with the warmth of a shark scenting blood. But this isn't just about money, Bobby continued. This is about justice for my son and consequences for both of you. He pulled out a thick folder and set it on a table where both of them could see it. This contains complete documentation of your crimes. Derek's previous fraud operations in 3 cities. Linda's financial planning for Tommy's murder. Your communications about the insurance policy. Your meeting with the men who helped sabotage Tommy's motorcycle. Linda went pale. What communications? We were careful. You were careful about phone calls. But Derek kept souvenirs. Bobby pulled out a series of printed emails. Love letters detailing your plans. Financial projections showing how you'd split the insurance money. Even a timeline for Tommy's murder that Derek titled Project Freedom. Derek stared at the emails in horror. Those were private. You had no right. I had every right to investigate my son's attempted murder, Bobby snapped. Just like the FBI will have every right to use these as evidence when they find your bodies. The word bodies hung in the air like a death sentence. Linda began crying again, but Derek straightened up with desperate defiance. You can't murder us in cold blood, Hutchinson. You're not that kind of man. You're right, Bobby agreed. I'm not going to murder you in cold blood. Relief flickered across Derek's face, quickly replaced by confusion as Bobby continued. I'm going to give you the same chance you gave my son. I'm going to arrange an accident. Bobby nodded to Marcus, who wheeled in a large metal tank connected to various tubes and gauges. Propane, Bobby explained conversationally. Highly flammable, but also heavier than air. When it leaks, it settles in low places and builds up until something ignites it. Gas explosion, Vinny said approvingly. Classic industrial accident. Happens all the time in places like this. The beauty is that the explosion will destroy most evidence of what happened here, Bobby continued. Your bodies will be found in the wreckage, but the cause of death will be listed as accidental. Just like Tommy's accident was supposed to look. Linda was hyperventilating now. Bobby, please. I know I made mistakes, but you can't do this. I'm your wife. You stopped being my wife when you decided to murder our son. Bobby's voice was ice cold. You became a stranger who tried to destroy my family for money. Tommy spoke for the first time. How long do we have before the explosion? Bobby checked his watch. The timer's set for 15 minutes. Enough time for final words, but not enough for any miraculous escapes. Derek tested his restraints frantically. This is insane. You're going to kill us for money that was never even real. The money was real enough for you to cut brake lines, Tommy replied calmly. Real enough for you to plan my murder. But I didn't go through with it. Only because you got caught. Tommy leaned forward slightly. Derek, if I hadn't discovered your meetings, if I hadn't found the insurance policy, if I hadn't started taking pictures, you would have murdered me and moved on to the next town. Derek couldn't deny it. The truth was written all over his face. Linda tried a different approach. Tommy, baby, I know you're angry, but you're better than this. You don't want to become a killer. Don't let your father turn you into something you'll regret. Tommy stared at his mother with eyes that held no warmth, no recognition, no love. You're right, Mother. I don't want to become a killer. That's why I'm not going to pull any triggers or light any fuses. Then stop this. I'm not stopping anything. I'm just watching justice happen to people who try to murder me for money. Tommy's voice carried a finality that chilled everyone in the room. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences. Bobby felt a complex mix of emotions watching his son. Tommy had been irreversibly changed by this experience, hardened in ways that would probably affect him for the rest of his life. But he was also displaying a strength and moral clarity that Bobby found impressive. 5 minutes, Marcus announced. Derek was pulling against his restraints hard enough to draw blood. Hutchinson, you win, okay? We'll confess everything. We'll plead guilty. We'll take whatever sentence the courts give us. The courts? Bobby laughed harshly. Derek, you're wanted in 3 states for fraud and murder. Vinny here has a contract on your life. And my son has permanent brain damage from the accident you caused. Do you really think the courts are going to provide adequate justice? Your son looks fine to me. Tommy touched the scar on his forehead where surgeons had relieved pressure on his brain. The doctors say I'll have seizures for the rest of my life. Possible memory problems. Coordination issues. All because you wanted insurance money. 2 minutes, Marcus called. Linda was praying now, begging God for forgiveness, promising to change if she survived. Derek had given up on his restraints and was offering Bobby everything he could think of: money, information about other criminals, sexual favors from Linda, anything to buy more time. Bobby watched them both with detached interest. In a few minutes, the people who tried to murder his son would be dead, and justice would be served. But he felt no satisfaction, no sense of completion, just cold efficiency and the knowledge that a necessary job was being finished. 30 seconds, Marcus announced. Tommy, Linda screamed. Please, I'm your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. That has to count for something. Tommy looked at her one final time. You stopped being my mother when you decided I was worth more dead than alive. Now you're just a stranger who tried to murder me for money. 10 seconds, Marcus called. Derek was cursing now, screaming threats about what his associates would do to Bobby's family. Linda was praying and crying and begging. Neither of them looked like the confident conspirators who'd planned Tommy's murder. They looked like what they'd always been: selfish, weak people who'd been willing to murder a child for money. Time, Marcus announced. But instead of an explosion, the warehouse filled with the sound of police sirens. Bobby smiled as Detective Morrison and a dozen officers poured through the doors, weapons drawn. Gentlemen, you're just in time. Derek and Linda stared in shock as their restraints were cut, and they were immediately resecured with handcuffs. Morrison looked around the warehouse, taking in the propane tank, which Bobby had never actually armed, the recording equipment, and the pile of evidence. Everything's been recorded? Morrison asked. Every word, Bobby confirmed, handing over multiple digital devices. Confessions to Tommy's attempted murder, details about Derek's previous crimes, financial records showing the insurance fraud. Everything you need for airtight convictions. Tommy stood up slowly, favoring his injured leg. They actually believed you were going to kill them with a gas explosion? People facing death will believe anything, Bobby replied. Even people who were planning to murder children for money. As Derek and Linda were led away in handcuffs, Derek managed one final outburst. You can't prove anything. Those confessions were coerced. Detective Morrison smiled grimly. Confessions given under duress to prevent imminent death? Yeah, those hold up in court just fine, especially when they're corroborated by physical evidence, financial records, and witness testimony. Linda said nothing as she was loaded into a police van. She just stared at Tommy with hollow eyes, perhaps finally understanding that she destroyed not just her son's trust, but her own life as well. What happens now? Tommy asked as the police cars disappeared into the darkness. Now they go to prison for the rest of their lives, Bobby replied. Derek's looking at charges in 4 states, plus whatever Vinny's friends decide to do to him in prison. Linda's looking at conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and accessory to attempted murder. Tommy nodded. And us? We rebuild. We move forward. We make sure this never happens again. As they walked toward Bobby's truck, Tommy asked the question that had been haunting him. Dad, are you proud of who I've become through this? Bobby stopped and looked at his son, really looked at him. Tommy had been forced to grow up in the worst possible way, had learned that evil could wear a loving face, had discovered that some betrayals were unforgivable. But he'd also shown strength, wisdom, and a moral clarity that impressed Bobby. I'm proud that you survived, Bobby said finally. I'm proud that you fought back. And I'm proud that when you had the chance for revenge, you chose justice instead. Tommy smiled for the first time in weeks. I learned from the best. As they drove away from the warehouse, Bobby reflected on everything that had happened. Derek and Linda would spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes. Tommy would carry scars from this experience forever, but he'd also proven he was strong enough to survive anything. And Bobby had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is ensuring that those who threaten your family never get the chance to threaten anyone else. Justice had been served. The family had been protected. And Bobby Hutchinson's reputation for never forgetting those who crossed him had been reinforced once again. Some debts could only be paid in full. Chapter 8. The aftermath. 6 months later, Tommy graduated from high school as valedictorian, his acceptance letter to MIT tucked safely in his desk drawer. The seizures had been mild and manageable. The coordination issues had resolved with physical therapy, and the memory problems had turned out to be a blessing. He could forget the sound of his mother's voice confessing to planning his murder. Derek Manning had been sentenced to life without parole after pleading guilty to attempted murder, fraud, and racketeering charges in 4 states. 3 weeks into his sentence at a maximum security facility in Arizona, he'd been found dead in his cell. The official cause was suicide, but Vinnie Torino's associates had been known to be creative in their debt collection methods. Linda Hutchinson had been sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. She'd aged a decade in the 6 months since her arrest. Her perfect blonde hair, now gray at the roots, her designer wardrobe replaced with prison orange. She'd written letters to Tommy begging for forgiveness, but he'd returned them unopened. Bobby stood in the empty master bedroom, packing the last of Linda's belongings into boxes marked for donation. He'd already removed her photos from the walls, cleared her cosmetics from the bathroom, and sorted through 20 years of accumulated marriage. Most of it was going to charity. He wanted nothing in his house that reminded him of the woman who'd tried to murder his son. Dad. Tommy appeared in the doorway. The real estate agent is here. Bobby nodded. They were selling the estate and moving to Boston, where Tommy would attend MIT and Bobby would establish the East Coast office of Hutchinson Construction he'd been considering for years. Fresh start, new city, no memories of brake lines and insurance policies. The real estate agent was an efficient woman in her 40s who'd been appropriately sympathetic about Bobby's tragic divorce without asking uncomfortable questions. She walked through the house taking notes, commenting on the custom craftsmanship and premium finishes that would make it attractive to upscale buyers. The only challenge will be the recent notoriety, she admitted as they finished the tour. The Linda Hutchinson case was all over the news. Some buyers might be put off by the association. Lower the price accordingly, Bobby said. I want it sold quickly. As the agent left, Bobby found Tommy in his room, packing books and photography equipment. The boy had grown 3 inches since the accident, filling out with muscle from months of physical therapy. At 18, he looked more like Bobby than ever. Same hard jaw, same calculating eyes, same ability to remain calm under pressure. Any regrets about leaving? Bobby asked. Tommy looked around his childhood bedroom, taking in the trophies and photos and memories of a more innocent time. None at all. This place is contaminated now. Strong word. Accurate word. Tommy sealed another box. Every room in this house has memories of her. Her reading me bedtime stories while planning my murder. Her making breakfast while calculating insurance payouts. Her hugging me goodbye while knowing she'd arranged for me never to come home. Bobby understood. He'd had the same thoughts walking through rooms where Linda had smiled and laughed and played the role of loving wife and mother while secretly planning to destroy their family. MIT will be good for you, Bobby said. New environment, intellectual challenges, people who don't know your history. What about you? Will you be okay starting over at 45? Bobby smiled. Son, I started over with nothing at 25. At 45, I've got experience, capital, and connections. Plus, I'll have the satisfaction of knowing the people who tried to destroy us are exactly where they belong. They finished packing in comfortable silence, 2 survivors preparing to move beyond the wreckage of betrayal. As the sun set over the estate Bobby had built with his own hands, he felt no nostalgia for what he was leaving behind. This house had been built on love and trust that had turned out to be illusions. The new house in Boston would be built on truth and the unbreakable bond between a father and son who'd survived the ultimate test together. Dad, Tommy said as they loaded the last boxes into the truck. I want you to know that what happened didn't just take away my mother. It gave me something too. What's that? Certainty. About who you are, about what matters, about how far you'll go to protect the people you love. Tommy looked directly at Bobby. I never have to wonder if you'd betray me for money or convenience or personal gain. I know you wouldn't. Bobby felt his throat tighten. You never had to wonder about that, son. I know that now. But before this happened, it was just faith. Now it's knowledge based on evidence. Tommy smiled grimly. She tried to destroy our family, but she ended up proving that the part of our family that matters is unbreakable. As they drove away from the estate, Bobby thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. Linda and Derek had thought they were targeting easy victims, a successful businessman distracted by his work, and a naive teenager who wouldn't see danger coming. They'd been wrong on both counts. Bobby Hutchinson had built his empire by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone else. Tommy Hutchinson had inherited his father's intelligence and strength, along with his mother's beauty and charm, but none of her weakness or selfishness. Derek and Linda had thought they were destroying a family. Instead, they forged it into something stronger than steel. In Boston, Bobby would build an even more successful company. Tommy would earn his engineering degree and probably surpass his father's achievements. They would both find new relationships, new challenges, new sources of happiness. But they would never again be vulnerable to the kind of betrayal that had nearly destroyed them. They'd learned that some people couldn't be trusted, some relationships were built on lies, and some enemies needed to be eliminated permanently. Most importantly, they'd learned that blood meant nothing compared to loyalty, that family was defined by actions rather than genetics, and that the strongest bonds were forged in the fire of shared survival. Linda Hutchinson had given birth to Tommy, but she'd lost the right to call herself his mother when she'd chosen money over his life. Bobby Hutchinson had earned his son's loyalty and respect by proving he'd never make that choice. As they crossed the state line, leaving behind everything associated with their former life, Bobby felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. Derek and Linda had received exactly what they deserved. Tommy had survived and grown stronger. Bobby had protected his family and eliminated the threats against them. The games were over. The war had been won, and the Hutchinson name would continue with honor in a new city, free from the contamination of betrayal and strengthened by the knowledge that they'd survived the worst that life could throw at them. Some battles ended with negotiated settlements. Others ended with total victory and the complete destruction of your enemies. This had been the second kind. Chapter 9, New Beginnings. 2 years later, Bobby stood on the roof of a half-finished skyscraper in downtown Boston, surveying the city that had become their new home. Hutchinson Construction East Coast had exceeded every projection, with contracts worth $50 million and a reputation for quality that had established them as the premier builder in the region. Tommy was in his sophomore year at MIT, studying engineering with a focus on structural design. He'd made Dean's List both semesters, joined the boxing team to work through his remaining anger, and started dating a brilliant chemistry student named Rachel who knew nothing about his past and didn't need to. Mr. Hutchinson, Bobby's new assistant, Janet, approached carefully. She'd learned that interrupting him during his rooftop thinking time required good reason. "You have a call from Detective Morrison." Bobby frowned. Morrison had kept in touch sporadically, updating them on legal developments, but it had been months since their last contact. He followed Janet to the construction trailer that served as their temporary office. "Morrison? What's the news?" "Bobby, I wanted to give you a heads up. Linda's been granted a medical compassionate release hearing. Her lawyers are claiming she's developed a severe psychiatric condition that requires specialized treatment." Bobby's jaw tightened. Meaning they want to transfer her to a minimum security psychiatric facility instead of prison. She'd still be confined, but the conditions would be much more comfortable. "What are her chances?" "Better than I'd like. She's been a model prisoner, no incidents, and the psychiatric evaluations support her claims of severe depression and anxiety. The judge might go for it." Bobby was quiet for a long moment. "When's the hearing?" "Next Tuesday. You and Tommy have the right to provide victim impact statements if you want to attend." After hanging up, Bobby stared out at the Boston skyline. Linda was trying to game the system one more time, looking for an easier way to serve her sentence. Even in prison, she was still scheming, still manipulating, still trying to avoid the full consequences of her actions. He called Tommy at MIT. His son listened without comment as Bobby explained the situation. "Do you want to go to the hearing?" Bobby asked. "Absolutely. She needs to understand that her victims are watching, that her crimes have permanent consequences. Tommy, you don't have to put yourself through that. Seeing her again. Dad, I need to see her. I need to look at the person who tried to murder me and make sure she understands that I survived everything she tried to do to me. The following Tuesday, Bobby and Tommy sat in a courtroom in Linda's current state, watching as his former wife was led in wearing shackles and a gray prison uniform. She'd lost 30 pounds and looked fragile, vulnerable, exactly the image her lawyers wanted to project. Linda's eyes found Bobby and Tommy in the gallery, and for a moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked. She'd probably hoped they wouldn't attend, that she could play the role of reformed victim without having to face the son she'd tried to murder. The psychiatric expert testified about Linda's deteriorating mental health, her remorse over her crimes, her potential for rehabilitation in a treatment facility. Linda herself took the stand, crying as she described her guilt and depression, her desperate desire to make amends for her terrible mistakes. She was good, Bobby admitted grudgingly. Convincing, sympathetic, genuinely fragile. If he hadn't known the truth about her, he might have believed the performance. When the prosecutor called Tommy to give his victim impact statement, the courtroom fell silent. At 20, Tommy had grown into a confident young man who commanded attention when he spoke. "Your Honor," Tommy began, "the defendant is my biological mother. She raised me, claimed to love me, and spent 2 years planning to murder me for insurance money." Linda flinched as if struck. She recruited a career criminal to help her. She researched methods of making my death look accidental. She took out a $2 million life insurance policy and calculated how to split the proceeds with her accomplice. Tommy's voice remained calm, factual, devastating. When I discovered evidence of their plan, the defendant and her accomplice attempted to murder me by sabotaging my motorcycle. I spent 3 days in a coma. I suffered permanent brain damage. I will have seizures for the rest of my life. The judge was listening intently, taking notes. But the physical damage isn't the worst part, Tommy continued. The worst part is learning that the woman who raised me, who I trusted completely, had been planning my death for 2 years. The worst part is knowing that every time she hugged me, every time she said she loved me, she was calculating how much money my death would be worth. Linda was crying harder now, but Tommy showed no sympathy. The defendant wants to serve her sentence in a comfortable psychiatric facility instead of prison. She wants sympathy for the depression and anxiety caused by being held accountable for trying to murder her own son. Tommy paused, letting that sink in. "Your Honor, I respectfully submit that the defendant's mental health problems are a direct result of her guilt over her crimes, not a reason to reduce her punishment. She chose to conspire to murder me. She chose to betray her family. She chose to value money over her son's life." Tommy looked directly at Linda. She made those choices when she was mentally competent and fully aware of the consequences. The fact that she now regrets those choices, the fact that living with the guilt is difficult for her, doesn't entitle her to a more comfortable prison cell. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I survived my mother's attempt to murder me. I rebuilt my life despite the permanent damage she caused. I've thrived in college and started building a career. I've proven that her efforts to destroy me failed completely. Tommy's voice hardened. Now I want to see her serve every day of the sentence she earned, in the prison she was assigned to, under the conditions that reflect the severity of her crimes, without special accommodations for the mental anguish caused by her guilt. Tommy returned to his seat without looking at Linda again. Bobby felt a surge of pride watching his son. The boy had become a man who understood that some people didn't deserve mercy, some crimes couldn't be mitigated by regret, and some consequences had to be faced in full. The judge deliberated for 30 minutes before denying Linda's request for transfer. She would serve her full sentence in maximum security, without the comfortable accommodations her lawyers had sought. As Linda was led away, she tried to catch Tommy's eye one more time. But Tommy was looking at his phone, checking messages from Rachel about their plans for the evening. Linda had become irrelevant to his life, a problem that had been solved and filed away. Outside the courthouse, Bobby and Tommy walked toward their rental car. "How do you feel?" Bobby asked. "Satisfied. She got exactly what she deserved. No more, no less." Tommy smiled, and I got to see that she's exactly where she belongs. Any regrets about coming? None. I needed to see her powerless, to confirm that she can't hurt us anymore. Tommy got into the passenger seat. She's going to spend the next 23 years in a small cell, thinking about what she lost when she chose money over family. As they drove toward the airport, Bobby reflected on how completely their roles had reversed. 2 years ago, he'd been the one consumed by rage and planning revenge. Now Tommy was the one with ice in his veins, calmly ensuring that justice was served. Linda had created her own nemesis when she tried to murder her son. Tommy would never forgive her, never show her mercy, never allow her to escape the full consequences of her betrayal. He would spend the rest of his life succeeding, thriving, and proving that her attempt to destroy him had failed completely. "Dad," Tommy said as their plane lifted off. "Thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty. It's about people who would never betray you, no matter what." Bobby squeezed his son's shoulder. "We're all the family we need." "I know, and that's why we're going to win at everything we do for the rest of our lives." As Boston disappeared below them, Bobby thought about the future. Tommy would graduate from MIT with honors, probably start his own company, definitely surpass every achievement Bobby had managed. He'd marry Rachel or someone like her, have children who would grow up knowing that family meant unbreakable loyalty. Bobby would continue building his empire, secure in the knowledge that his son was strong enough to handle anything life threw at him. They would both find new sources of happiness, new challenges to conquer, new ways to prove that the people who tried to destroy them had only made them stronger. Linda would spend the next 2 decades in a cell, thinking about the family she'd betrayed and the life she'd thrown away for money. Derek was already dead, his debt to society paid in full. Justice had been served. The family had been protected. The enemies had been eliminated. And Bobby Hutchinson's legacy would continue through a son who understood that some people couldn't be trusted, some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, and some victories were worth whatever they cost. The war was over. They had won completely. Some stories ended with forgiveness and reconciliation. Others ended with justice and the total defeat of those who'd chosen to become enemies. This had been the second kind, and Bobby Hutchinson wouldn't have it any other way. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.